Hi, who are you?
I am Ashley Elder. I am Parker's mom.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Elder. I'm Parker's stepdad.
Okay. I'm gonna be asking you some questions about
Okay.
Do we
your
need
time.
context of how old we are?
If you want to.
Oh,
I mean, you don't have to tell.
I was born in the early 80s.
Okay.
I was born in 1977.
Okay. Nice. Do you have any memory of Diana's wedding? Princess Diana?
I do. I remember that I had paper dolls. Okay, so like paper dolls were these things that were literally made out of paper, and then they had clothes that were printed on paper as well, and you like formed them over the paper doll.
You had to cut them out, right?
You had to cut them out, like, well, they were kind of perforated, so like they like popped out, and then you like dressed her in different things, and one of the dresses was her wedding dress, and like it just was something I played with as a kid.
I remember sitting watching it on TV with my grandmother, and they were showing, bits and pieces of the wedding because it lasted all day.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very end, they had this huge elaborate carriage that brought them in, and then they ended
Her
up
veil
going.
was like out the window.
Yeah, they ended up going up to the balcony, and it was a big deal that they came out like as husband and wife, and were like doing the royal wave. That was pretty neat.
Yeah. You remember anything about the Challenger?
I remember watching them go to the Challenger, like because they did this huge production about like questions and answers and things like that about what they were
Remember there was a
expecting out of
teacher.
it and things.
Teacher.
Yeah, there was a teacher on it. And I remember it being like one of the first women to be in that situation, and thinking it was just kind of cool because all of her students were watching her in the classroom and things, and they were doing the interview, and I remember them walking to like on the ramp to go into the capsule, and then
It was a snow day, so we actually weren't at school. I think it was, regular day of the week. And so for us, I remember my mom was home with us, and we were watching it on TV because we were home for a snow day. And I remember we were sitting there having lunch, and I remember, they were covering it as it took off and then blew up. And of course, it was devastating even as a small kid, but it was, very super sad.
Do you remember anything about Michael Jackson?
that was a little bit
Change
before
of
my time.
subject. Yeah, of course, obviously Jackson 5, Michael Jackson growing into the solo artist Michael Jackson was interesting. I have a big memory of Thriller when he came out with Thriller. It was obviously a really big deal because they put it on TV, and they were doing a music video, which back then music videos were not that popular. It was kind of a new feature that they were doing, and of course, the Thriller video, if you've ever seen it, it's very choreographed and a little bit scary. And so, of course, after I watched it, I loved it and tried to scare my brother, which was a lot of fun. And learning the dance moves and everything was fun. So that was, I was small at that time. So it definitely stood out. You don't remember?
I don't remember much.
Do you remember anything about E.T.?
I remember. I actually saw that one in the movie theater. My uncle took me to go see that one.
I saw it in the movie theater also.
It was it was cool because obviously it was very sci-fi, and E.T. Phone Home was the thing, but it was actually a very sad movie. I remember in the end being crying and looking over at my uncle who was also crying, and it was definitely moving from that perspective. Of course, I was really young at the time, but it was sad.
I thought it was very, very strange. Really, had to change my mindset a little bit to grasp it.
It was a little scary too when they were taking him through the tunnels and
yeah, and I was worried about the kid who kept getting pulled away and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about Pac-Man?
I played Pac-Man all the time. There's this local pizza place. It's actually a pizza place is still there. It's Partners Pizza in Peachtree City, and of course it doesn't look the same as it did then, but it's very similar. And they had this machine, and it was the size of a coffee table, but it was stand up, and it had glass on the top, and one player sat on one side and one player sat on the other, and you had the glass over your handle, and you had to move it and stuff like that, and push the buttons and things. And so my sister and I would always sit across from each other and play, and I would always demolish, of course. But
ours was different. Ours was at Pizza Hut in Griffin, and ours was Space Invaders instead of Pac-Man. But you would sit there and across the way, and you'd get to each take turns, and that was always a big deal.
yeah, it was one player and then the other player, and then you die, and then you go back and forth until It was only a quarter to play.
It was basically like the stand-up arcade machines you were looking at now, except laid in a table.
Yeah.
It was fun. Back before we really had like Super Nintendo or anything like that.
Do you remember anything about Space Invaders?
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Yeah, the Space Invaders was our version of Pac-Man.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's pretty fun.
Do you remember anything about the Walkman?
I had a Walkman. And it was like about that big. And it had a clip on it. I used to clip it on my pants, like on my belt, my shorts. But you would make your own tapes a lot of times. Like you'd like
The first
the
mixtape.
first version of a mixtape where you would like record it off of the radio. Like you had to wait for the song to come, and then sometimes you had to like stop it if you didn't like the song. You'd get a little bit of that song. But yeah,
You had to listen to the countdown so that you would know, when
which
you would
one,
get which sound.
which song.
Because they
you
would
wanted
always
to record.
intro which song it was going to be. You could hit
And
the
you could-
chord.
And then you like, I remember one time the back of it broke off, and so the batteries kept falling out, so I had to duct tape it back together.
Nice.
But that thing was huge, and it was like carrying bigger than a phone on your hip.
And it sucked AA batteries. You had to always have AA batteries ready.
Do you remember anything about Waco?
Oh,
I vaguely remember that.
yeah, so that was the FBI kind of raided the compound of a guy that was probably not the best kind of person, but he held out for a really long time, and it got very contentious. And then a lot of people think the FBI really overstepped. But unfortunately, the worst part was that there was a fire that was started, and many people died because it was a huge explosion and fire. And I just remember seeing it on TV with the fire, and they had kind of armored vehicles that the FBI were using, and it went on for days. I mean, they were negotiating back and forth for what seemed like weeks. And then unfortunately they breached it, and you know, a lot of people died because of the fire. It was really a sad situation.
Do you remember anything about the OJ trial?
I remember watching him in the Bronco. Like, it was like that high-speed chase that you see,
Slow
like,
speed chase.
well, technically, yeah. But like the helicopter hovering and like, you know, filming down on him, and just like I can still see on TV like that image of him in that white Bronco.
Yeah.
Going.
I just remember growing up, that was like the first time that like the court scene, that's when they first started doing all the reporting on court. And every day there was a rundown of everything that had happened in court. They would show all the sketches of the artists. A lot of it was on actual TV, like they would use it live. And of course, you know, the moment that everybody remembers is they actually made him try on the glove, and the glove didn't fit, and
He kept like faking like he was trying to.
the defense.
I think he was guilty, but like he kept like faking it the way he would
he's
do
dead
it.
now. We'll never know.
You know, but like the way he was like, I can't get it on. You know.
The glove doesn't fit. You must acquit. That's what the defense attorney used to say. So yeah, I remember that one pretty well. I think everybody was shocked
That he
when he got off. I
Oh,
think
like,
everybody was surprised.
not guilty.
Okay. Do you remember anything about Windows 95?
That was mine.
That was your nerd side.
It was a huge deal because we had always had computers where we were playing, the old style Windows, right? The internet, you know, you'd get your broadband, slow connection going. And that was the first time where things actually moved a little bit easier. You got to point and click for things. That was the first time we really started using Excel and Word and PowerPoint.
Was that the AOL disc that used to come in the mail? Was that different?
That was how you got your internet and your
Okay.
email.
Yeah, I
that
do
was
remember
most
that.
important, the email. But yeah, the Windows 95 finally made sort of playing on the computer easier and more sort of adaptable for everyone. You didn't have to kind of know coding language to be able to get through it. My dad always had a little computer in this like side little office that he had. And we could play a few games, and we had Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and that was Windows 95 actually made it easy to play that game.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about the Olympic bombing in Atlanta?
I remember seeing it, thinking it was really, really close.
Yeah, so that was the year after I graduated high school. I was actually an intern for the Olympics all during the time it was there in Atlanta. I worked for the International Committee of the Olympics, ICOG. And I was actually with Juan Antonio Samaranch, who was the head of the Olympic Committee. I was his errand boy. I got to bring him newspapers and deliver papers for him, and got to meet a whole bunch of cool people because of it. It was unpaid, but it was kind of neat. I got to ride MARTA up every day. We basically got paid in going and using tickets. So every day after we worked our shift, they would give us tickets, free tickets to go to some of the events that were happening. So I got to go to a lot of the events. But obviously that meant that I was always around when things were going on. And that night that it happened, it was in the park down in Midtown, downtown Atlanta. And I remember I was actually at one of the venues that was a little bit further up towards Buckhead. And I remember the security guards being very, very, like, all of a sudden, really, scared, and like everybody kind of locking things down because they had heard over the radios and through the security apparatus that, there had been a bomb. And of course, everybody was trying to figure out what was going on. But yeah, after that happened, everything was much more difficult. All of the work that we had to do with the committee was very difficult, and only because we had gone through and had security screening and everything before were we able to kind of be there. But the cops were everywhere. It was sad
That was
because
kind of the first time I remember feeling like going into a public place wasn't as safe.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I felt like everywhere we went was safe, and
Yeah.
it was really close.
And it was out of nowhere. Like nobody really knew like why they were targeting that person, or what they were trying to do, what the purpose of it was. I mean, it wasn't like a terrorist act. It was more like a deranged person doing something, which I think later on they figured out it wasn't actually him. So I don't even know who did it, but it was definitely a downer because the Olympics had been very successful up to that point.
Do you remember anything about the Titanic movie?
I saw the Titanic movie multiple times
In the
in the theater, multiple times in the theater. Like, I even remember going to see another movie, and then like as soon as that movie ended, like going across the hall to the Titanic movie and just standing in the back and watching it again, because it was just so, like, it was moving. It was just, but it was also like that, I don't know, like it just, the soundtrack of it, like all of it, the feels were just, I can still feel it. And like thinking that
So what was your favorite part?
the dancing and the, like, when he took Rose down to the bottom, like, of the ship and they were dancing and stuff like that. Like,
I like the romantic part.
of course.
Okay. Do you remember anything about Princess Diana's death?
Yeah, very vividly. I think because I kind of felt that connection to her as a little girl, just because, she was like a princess and like a fairy tale. And, I grew up with like Cinderella and those, like, that feeling of princesses, and just like seeing it happen and like watching it at me. Of course, I did not see it when it happened, but I remember like being where we were all on family vacation together, and we had the TV on, and like it, being like just shocked at like feeling like it wasn't real, like something had really happened, like it was very sad because it was the whole world kind of mourned at that point for her.
You just kept wondering, like, how did the paparazzi get away with it? Like,
Yeah.
because nobody ever really was like.
Or how did someone get away with it, really? I mean,
And of course, there was a lot of discussion of whether the crown was involved, but
and I didn't
it was all
even know
speculation.
who like Dodi Fayette was prior to that. Like, I didn't know like he and she had kind of like been a thing or whatever. Like he was a nobody almost, but then come to find out he actually was a somebody. It was a very strange,
it was sad too.
like, unanswered questions. kind of
Especially
thing.
remembering the boys and
Yeah, watching them on their, like, following their mom
Yeah.
in the casket. It was just,
Do you remember anything about the internet?
there's your AOL disc.
There's your AOL disc. I remember the when you first got the modem. I remember my dad first getting the modem and plugging up and talking about it and being like, yeah, this is something new that we're gonna have access to all of this information. And of course we plugged it in and it makes the crazy
that sound,
noise.
that dial-up sound.
And it takes forever. I mean, it's so slow to get like the tiniest little bit. But then once it finally started and you got it going and getting email and that kind of thing, it was pretty neat.
But I think that like something about the internet too is that it changed one of the things that we were talking about, like, some of the history things that we don't really remember a lot about when we were little changed generationally because y'all know about more things faster because of the internet. That the ability to get information so quickly and to know what was going on so quickly, and then also to research it. I mean, like, it changed from having encyclopedias.
You used to have to go to the library to learn
encyclopedias
things.
to being able to do it. It just completely changed how we searched for anything.
I remember the nightly news was like appointment TV. Like, you had to watch that because you wouldn't know what was happening in the world. Or a newspaper, you'd have to get the newspaper the next day. Whereas once you had the internet, you were getting, every time you went and connected, you could download everything and see what was going on. That was a big change.
All right. Do you remember anything about Columbine?
Columbine was traumatic for me because I was in college. I was in the dorm, and I remember, and it was seared in my head. There was one kid that climbed out the window and was like hanging out the side of the window, like on the wall, trying to get out. And it was just, I mean, that one was traumatizing for me. Like, cause like same thing. It didn't feel like something could happen at a school like that.
Kind of removed your safety feeling. Right?
Yeah.
Or how could people really do, like, what in the world were those students thinking? Like, where were they so terribly affected that that's what they resorted to?
I mean, it's just, it took away that kind of that innocence of being at school and school being such a safe place.
And I just remember they kept coming up with more and more stories about what was happening in those kids' lives and how they got to the point that they did. And then also, like, all of the stories that all of the people that were in the school as it was happening told was just, it
like
blew
the
your
broom
mind.
closets
It was
and
scary. Scary to think. And then, of course, like, we didn't have kids, so we didn't really think of it from a kid perspective, but we were thinking of it in the sense of, if it happened to us, what
How
would you
we
do?
react?
And then, it was all over about, trying to plan for, like, if something like that happened at your school. It was traumatic.
Do you remember anything about the Y2K scare?
My parents were freaked, thinking that, like,
The end of the world.
it really was going to be the end of the world. And I think, like, so there's part of it that was, like, a religious side of Y2K that, was, the end of the world was coming, like, it was 2,000 years after Christ, and so I think that there was a religious side of it as well as the...
See, I was at Georgia Tech at the time, so the Georgia Tech, everything was happening there around computer coding and how to fix it from 2 digits to 4 digits. And so I constantly was hearing all about that. And most of the people at Georgia Tech were like, this is overblown. We've got all this figured out. The banks, of course, was where everybody was most worried. Like, suddenly your bank wasn't going to be able to figure out how much money you had, or that you would lose all of your money.
It would go back to what it was prior to it coming out,
But I remember at that night, at the ball drop.
At midnight.
Everybody's like taking a deep breath. And then everybody's like looking, clocks are still working, getting on the computer it still works, and everybody going, oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
I remember there was a few things that messed up, but it was very minor compared to all of the buildup. Because the buildup started like early in the year. Like, it was like people were freaking out all through the summer, and by the time we got closer and closer, it was like really scary. So I was glad nothing really happened.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about the Backstreet Boys?
I went to see the Backstreet Boys in concert. Yeah, they were just, it was like watching, I never like got so excited about them that I was like one of those who like screaming fans who was like on the sidelines or whatever. I just enjoyed their music, but watching some of the other girls like that were friends of mine just get so excited and like say they were gonna marry them and all. It was just.
So you were a New Kids on the Block fan more.
No, I just was a realist, I think. I was never going to meet them, and they were never going to fall in love with me. I was never going to marry them.
As a guy, we just were all like kind of bummed because all the girls, that's all they wanted to talk about. And of course, as guys, we didn't want to talk about it. So we were glad when that all passed.
Do you remember anything about Britney Spears?
Britney was the same kind of.
And that was the bad girl thing, right? I mean, she was going more towards the, like,
Well, she was kind of somewhat innocent in the beginning, and then...
toxic. Get
Yeah,
off
then
radio.
and then I remember the snake, the big snake, and thinking like one of her videos, she had this big long green snake.
And it was hugely
I
controversial.
mean, and she had very little clothes on, and but it was like the snake was all around, like it was just very visual,
She was trying to be the antidote for all the boy bands. So.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then she actually dated one of the boy bands.
Oh, there you go.
Right?
Do you remember anything about Napster?
Napster was. I haven't thought about Napster in a long time.
Yeah, we got in a little trouble with Napster.
I never
at
got in
Georgia Tech.
trouble.
We downloaded a lot of things.
So Napster was the way to download music before. It was like basically like Apple iTunes.
It was called peer sharing.
But like you had your CD, you put it on and downloaded it onto Napster, and then everybody else was allowed to pull from that CD and put it on their own like sharing device, like their own music device. Which at that point it was like the little iPods, like but they were like tiny.
So at first people thought it was a way to get around copy infringement, but then it became
You had
massive.
to pay for it.
Everybody was doing it. But of course then we get, the 99-cent songs out of it. All the rest of the record executives figured out that if people are going to work this hard to steal it, then why not just give them something that doesn't cost that much and see if they'll buy it? And people bought it.
It was like 99 cents a song. And you could use it as a ringtone too. Like that was, yeah.
Do you remember anything about Lance Armstrong?
Yeah.
I just remember watching
Tour de France. He won a bunch of the Tour de France's and was controversial because really, from an American standpoint, he was hugely famous, and they hadn't had a whole lot of bicycle riders that had been famous. And the Tour de France was always an idea, but that made it hugely popular. Only to find out later that he was accused of doping, which is
steroid use.
no, not steroids, but he played with his blood to get better performance, and so they ended up taking a lot of his championships away. But at the end of the day, he still remained famous, and later on had cancer and became even more famous with his Live Strong thing. So he at least did some good things out of being caught for cheating.
Okay. Do you remember anything about 9/11?
Yeah,
We could talk a lot about 9/11.
probably. Yeah, I was in college
I
still.
was still in college as well.
I was living. I had a house that I was living in, and I remember like having the TV on in the background, and I was in my kitchen, and I came back in and like saw the second plane hit and called my mom, and I was like, "Turn your TV now! Turn on your TV now!" And it just was. I mean, that one I think is one of those that shakes you to the core. Like watching it. I mean, and even I did not know anybody personally that was on any of the flights or was in either of the buildings, but just like seeing the shrapnel and the way the metal was still standing. I mean, like, and then the flag hanging on it. I mean, all of it was, seeing the buildings actually fall. And I mean, y'all have all seen the videos of it because, it was so traumatic for us as a country and, as a nation. And actually feeling like it was happening in real time was just so, like, not knowing what was going to happen. Because, I mean, you guys watch it and you know what's going to happen. And so you can kind of brace yourself and prepare for it a little bit. And, like, not knowing if it was only 2 flights, if it was 3 flights, if it was going to be 12 flights that were about to, and where else it was not safe.
I mean, it's one thing to see like the airplane fly into the building. It's another thing to see the building fall. And that just, blows your mind because that there's firefighters and everybody going to try to save everybody in the building, and then suddenly it's gone. Yeah, it was traumatic. I mean, I remember I was home from school. I was about to graduate college, and it was a function of like just sitting in front of the TV trying to like comprehend all of the news that was coming in. Of course, it was sparse because everything was happening so crazy. Nobody knew where this came from, how it happened. And then, the second plane happened, and then the other one in the Pentagon, and it's like, you really start to freak out. Like, this is like a huge scale invasion. Like, what's really happening? My dad worked for the airlines, which made it worse. and obviously, you know, from you know my perspective, about to graduate college, I mean, it was definitely a traumatic time.
All right. Well, thank you for the interview.